Hey guys, tonight we slip into the hush of a long-forgotten evening, no neon lights, no car horns, just the faint brush of warm wind across baked earth and the occasional snort of a resting bullock. You're not in the modern world anymore. You're standing on the edge of the Indus Valley some 4,000 years ago and the stars above look oddly exactly the same. Maybe even brighter. Your feet tread softly on sun-hardened mudbrick. You pass a sleeping dog curled beside a well and the scent of baked barley still hangs faintly in the air. Everything feels calm but not dead. The city breathes. Somewhere in the distance, water drips steadily in a courtyard, keeping time like a liquid metronome. You hear it before you see it, the quiet clink of stone on bronze, the creak of a beam scale, a low chuckle from a trader working late. You follow the sound, past shuttered homes with perfectly aligned bricks. Seriously, these people did geometry before geometry was cool. And come upon a little courtyard stall lit by an oil lamp. There's no shouting, no flashy signs. Just a man sitting cross-legged, holding what looks like a pebble? You lean closer. It's not a pebble. It's tiny, carved, and oddly perfect. A small stone cube, black and shiny, resting neatly on a scale. The man smiles at you, then winks like he knows something you don't. Welcome to the world where power, wealth, and trust rested on things you could easily swallow by accident. The tiny stone weights of the Indus Valley were no joke. You probably won't survive this as a modern eBay seller. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post where you're tuning in from and what time it is. I love knowing who's sharing the night with me. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The man gestures for you to sit, so you do, settling into the soft dust as he gently places another weight on the scale. It's almost nothing, a whisper of stone, and yet the bronze tray tips just slightly. You can tell it matters. You glance around and realize that even this tiny trade, maybe for a few threads of dyed cotton or a scoop of chickpeas, is being conducted with absolute attention to balance. No one's eyeballing anything here. You look at the tray again. On it lie several small stone cubes in graduated sizes. Some are jet black, others a lighter, dusty hue, and a few glint faintly in the lamplight. They're smooth, symmetrical, and cool to the touch, the kind of object you instinctively want to rub between your fingers. They seem ordinary, but in the Indus Valley they were revolutionary. These weren't just weights, they were part of a silent language spoken across the region. From Harappa to Mohenjo-Daro, from Lothal to Dhalavira, everyone used them. And not randomly. They follow a pattern, most often binary, doubling in mass in consistent units, like a system that could practically plug into a spreadsheet. Except, 2,000 years before the spreadsheet. Historians still argue whether these weights came from a centralized authority, a royal decree, a temple guideline, or whether they evolved through mutual agreement across distant cities. Either way, the result is the same, astonishing consistency. Like if you dropped a weight in Mohenjo-Daro and picked up the same one in Harappa, it would match exactly. No customs fees, no calibration anxiety. Just trust. You wander from the stall, curiosity pulling you deeper into the city's underbelly. There's no grand palace here, no pharaohs, no pyramids, but the place hums with quiet intelligence. The bricks are uniform. The drainage system is oddly amazing. Seriously, these folks had public sanitation that some modern towns would envy. You duck into a side alley and find another trader, this one weighing fish. The smell hits first. Not awful, just very fishy. He has a similar set of weights, though his are worn, the edges rounded from years of use. He grunts a greeting and lets you hold one. It's heavier than it looks, dense, like it wants to sink into your palm. Maybe made of chert or jasper, stones chosen for their stability, not flash. And here's the quirky bit, some of these weights, especially the older ones, are thought to have been carved by specialized artisans, possibly even trained in mathematics, or at least in eyeballing stuff really well. One recovered workshop had a layout so orderly that modern archaeologists described it as almost clinical. Tools arranged just so. Waste stones swept into tidy piles. It's like walking into a prehistoric IKEA. You lean on a wall, watching another deal wrap up. Two men trade grain for copper ingots, and once again, the weights come out. They're treated with reverence like holy objects. You half expect one to start glowing. But what's fascinating, really, is that the people using them don't write anything down. The Indus script, that beautiful looping mystery, still hasn't been cracked. So everything you're watching, every exchange, every calculation is based on trust, repetition, and community memory. No receipts. No tax returns. Just mutual understanding that one tiny cube equals another tiny cube equals a bag of lentils. You're starting to understand now, this isn't just trade. It's choreography. A dance of hands, scales, and weight stones passed like sacred beads. Everything feels quiet, deliberate, timeless. And then you trip over a cat. It yowls, offended, then promptly resumes sleeping on a ledge like it owns the place. You rub your toe, feeling appropriately humbled. Behind you, the fish seller chuckles. He offers you a tiny, gleaming weight, not as payment, but as a souvenir. You take it, feel the cold stone against your skin, and know, somehow, that you're holding more than just a carved rock. You're holding a fragment of logic, a building block of civilization. A mosquito whines near your ear. You swat gently. The stars seem even brighter now. You tuck the weight into your linen belt pouch, careful not to lose it. After all, in the city, that little cube could buy you dinner, or at least the right to complain about dinner being late. You wake the next morning to the clatter of wheels and the scent of damp clay warming in the sun. Someone's already started sweeping the street. Not for show, just habit. Cleanliness here isn't aesthetic. It's structural. You stretch beneath a thatched awning, your borrowed sleeping mat leaving woven impressions on your arms. The little weight from last night presses against your hip like a reminder. You're not a tourist anymore. You're part of the system now. As you walk through the city, the grid of the streets unfolds beneath your bare feet like a kind of language. Everything's aligned with eerie precision, north-south, east-west. Urban planning long before GPS. It's almost unsettling. Like the whole city was built from a blueprint drafted by someone with serious control issues and access to an unlimited supply of bricks. And those bricks? Identical in size. Not just close, identical. Historians still argue whether this means there was a central regulatory body or just an incredibly obsessive architectural culture. Either way, when you see a brick in Harappa, you can be 95% sure it will match one in Mohenjo-Daro. The same proportions 1:2:4. It's geometry baked into clay. You spot a row of traders arranging goods on cloths, beads, copper tools, bundles of dyed thread. Their customers handle everything with care, eyes flicking toward the nearby scales. One boy is clearly learning the ropes. He keeps picking the wrong weight and getting gently corrected by his grandmother, who sighs like she's been through this 1,000 times. Maybe she has. You pause near a man trading dried dates. His weights are curious, not just cubes but also cone-shaped pieces, maybe for finer calibrations. He taps each one before placing it on the scale, like knocking on a door. Then he gestures to a small pot of honey. A fair trade, he insists. The scale agrees. That's the thing. Here, the weights are law. But they're not enforced by soldiers or tax collectors. They're enforced by consensus. A collective decision that the small black cube is worth more than a handshake, maybe even more than a written contract, especially since no one can agree on how to read their writing system anyway. Still, the writing is everywhere. On seal stones, on pottery shards, on amulets dangling from necks. Tiny pictographs, many of them featuring animals, fish, birds, the famous unicorn that might not be a unicorn. Historians still argue whether these symbols record ownership, prayers, or product labels. Personally, you're starting to suspect it's just really elaborate branding. Like ancient logos. This brick brought to you by Unicorn Seal Industries. You duck into a shaded corner near the bead market. Here, the craftsmanship takes a sharp turn toward obsession. Rows of glinting carnelian and lapis lazuli sit in symmetrical trays, sorted not by color or size, but weight. Yep, each bead weighed before being strung. They aren't sold by strand. They're sold by mass. And who makes sure the mass is right? You guessed it, the stone weights. It's here you learn about the clever little system. The weights follow a binary pattern. The most common unit is around 13.6 grams. Though no one's sure what they called it. Above that, everything doubles: 13.6, 27.2, 54.4, and so on. Below that, it halves, like the ancient version of base 2 code. If you're a math nerd, you're geeking out. If you're not, well, it's still impressive that people in 2600 BCE had more consistent measurement standards than a lot of airport luggage scales. You sit beside the bead seller, who's threading a necklace with the kind of focus usually reserved for surgery. She hands you a small black cube, about the size of your thumbprint. It's smooth, polished, a little chipped on one corner. This, she explains, is her lucky weight. The one that never fails. She says it half as a joke, but there's reverence in her voice. Like maybe, just maybe, this tiny object has something sacred in it. Nearby, A pair of merchants begins a loud discussion over whether a spool of thread counts as lightweight or very lightweight. They pull out their scales, the weight stones come clinking out, and just like that, you're watching a full-blown textile argument resolved with the calm authority of a seesaw. No shouting, no refunds, just balance. That's when you learn the phrase standardized tolerance. It's not ancient, of course, it's a modern archaeological term. But it fits. The Indus Valley weights had a tolerance margin so tight it's nearly modern. Some scholars believe the artisans used specific tools, copper chisels, fine abrasives, to reach this kind of precision. Others think they had naturally symmetrical stones and just ran with it. Historians still argue whether advanced math was involved or if it was all intuitive skill passed down like a family recipe. Someone hands you a drink, a pale, watery barley beer served in a baked clay cup. It tastes like a handshake between grain and pond water, but it's strangely refreshing. You sip and watch another scale transaction. You can't help but wonder how many people over how many years weighed how many bundles of grain on how many tiny cubes like these. There's no drama, no tipping point, no eureka moment, just consistency. And that, you realize, is the real power here. Not the sharpness of weapons or the size of monuments. Just the quiet, unstoppable reliability of people agreeing on tiny, perfect stones. Someone shouts in the distance, a donkey's wandered into the dye vats again. There's a collective groan, but no panic. You watch a small girl chase it off with surprising authority. She's still laughing when she returns to her family's stall and resumes weighing pepper pods. Like nothing happened. You stand and stretch. The city smells of smoke now, and the sun dips low enough to cast the brick walls in long amber shadows. You catch your reflection in a puddle and think, I've seen the foundation of a civilization. And it fit in the palm of my hand. You spend the early evening winding through Mohenjo-Daro's back alleys where the shadows are cooler and the sounds a little less polished. This isn't the part of town you see on painted pottery. The pristine grid gives way to narrow walkways and haphazard staircases, like the city let its hair down after a long day of precise geometry. But even here, amid cracked bricks and sleeping dogs, the rules still hum beneath your feet. You pause at a side stall, just a flat piece of wood balanced on mud-brick legs, where a middle-aged man sells lentils by weight. He has 3 stone cubes and a scale made of string and shell. As he weighs your portion, he whistles through his teeth, eyes flicking between the scale pans with the seriousness of a courtroom judge. When the lentils balance against 2 weights, one large, one small, he gives a satisfied grunt. Justice, apparently, has been served. The system still astounds you. There's no centralized currency here, no king's face stamped on silver. Yet everything flows. Goods change hands. Disputes are resolved. People eat. You wonder if a coin ever really beats a cube or if humans just prefer the jingle. You make your way to the edge of the city where the layout grows more deliberate again. You pass massive granaries, huge structures with thick walls ventilated to keep grain cool and dry. Archaeologists believe they stored surplus harvests here, maybe under the supervision of local councils or priestly overseers. No one's sure. Historians still argue whether these were temples, government warehouses, or just very enthusiastic pantries. And of course, stone weights were essential here too. Think about it. In a society without coins, where grain is wealth, you don't just have measurement systems, you live by them. Your reputation, your meals, your offerings at the shrine all hinge on whether your barley weighs what you say it does. You spot a young scribe crouched in the corner of a granary, etching something onto a clay tablet. His tongue pokes out slightly, deep in concentration. You lean over and catch sight of symbols, a triangle, a wavy line, what might be a fish. He's recording the delivery, someone explains. Which farmer brought how much? The math they add happens before the writing. First the stones, then the seal. There's a beauty to it, this rhythm, scale, weigh, record, repeat. It's like music, but for barley. And behind it all? Those tiny black cubes keeping the beat. You follow a narrow path that curves past the bathing complex, the Great Bath, they call it now. Once again, the engineering slaps you in the face with its audacity. Perfectly fired bricks, waterproof bitumen, carefully sloped drains. Someone cared. Someone measured. Someone weighed the lime and the sand and the water and made sure the mix was right. You kneel at the edge and run your fingers over the smooth stone lip. Still cool to the touch after all this time. A local boy shows you something from his satchel, a stone weight shaped like a miniature barrel. Not standard. Not part of the Cuban cone crowd. He grins. Toy, he says in a mix of sign and syllable. But then adds something that sounds suspiciously like tax weight. You blink. a child's toy, or a symbol of economic pressure? Historians still argue whether some of these off-model weights were ceremonial, educational, or just clever fakes to tip the scales. Literally. Later, you settle under the arch of a half-crumbled doorway, the air thick with jasmine and smoke. A group nearby sings a low, rhythmic chant while kneading dough. They press it into clay molds before baking it in a domed oven. You watch one loaf puff and brown, then collapse slightly under its own heat. A woman pulls it out, slices it clean in half, and sets one piece on a scale beside a single weight. The other half will go to trade. The weight decides how much. It's so efficient it almost feels sci-fi. You imagine a future archaeologist stumbling across your kitchen scale and trying to decipher what culture would bother weighing their sandwich. Joke's on them, you're just part of a very old tradition. A whisper reaches your ear, ever seen a fake weight? You turn and an old man chuckles, eyes twinkling. He reaches into a cloth pouch and pulls out what looks like a regular stone cube. But when he hands it to you, it's light. Hollow. Good for cheating, he says with a wink. But only once. He laughs and you laugh too. Apparently, the ancient world had scammers. Who knew? But he grows quiet, thoughtful. Balance is sacred, he murmurs. A weight is not just a thing. It is a promise. That lands deeper than you expect. The next time you see someone trade using a scale, you feel the gravity of it, pun intended. You decide to head back through the market district as night falls. Lanterns begin to flicker to life, hung low to the ground, casting golden circles that shimmer on clay walls and polished beads. You spot a weaver closing up shop, carefully wrapping her tools and more carefully stacking her weights in a cloth-lined box. She ties the box shut, touches it once like a blessing, and slides it into a hidden recess behind her loom. Safe. Sacred. Accounted for. As the moon rises, the city exhales. The music softens. The trade's quiet. But the scales remain. You pass one left out on a stone ledge, two weights balanced as if frozen in conversation. You don't touch it. It feels like walking past a shrine. And maybe it is. You wake before dawn, lulled not by bird song but by the rhythmic slap of water against stone. Somewhere nearby, someone is already scrubbing laundry by torchlight. You rub your eyes and sit up slowly, the faint smell of wet earth and wood smoke tugging you back into the present, such as it is here in the Indus Valley where time feels stubbornly unwilling to march forward. As you step outside, the city stirs. Mohenjo-daro is like an orchestra tuning before a performance. Pots clink. Doors creak. You pass a woman drawing water from a well using a pulley system of almost absurd simplicity, just a rope, a wheel, and a clay bucket. And yet, as always, you notice the careful calibration. The bucket? Measured. The rope's length? Likely knotted to a known value. The weight of a full load? Predictable. It's early, and already the day hums with math. You follow a merchant rolling up the woven shutters on his stall. He lays out beads. Brilliant carnelian, dull lapis lazuli, and a few green glass fakes for good measure. As he counts them, you watch him use a palm-sized board with tiny indentations. He places a bead in each hollow like a child's game until he fills them. He then removes a small black cube, another weight, and places it next to the lot. You ask what he's doing. Counting by weight, he mutters, not looking up. One weight equals one batch. He shrugs. Faster than beads. You realize this is unit pricing without numbers. Practicality dressed in cleverness. The simplicity is deceiving. These people didn't just stumble onto this system. It was refined, cultural, maybe even ritualized. Historians still argue whether the weight system originated from trade needs or had religious significance, each cube a silent prayer for fairness. Not far from the stall, you notice something strange, a group of traders in heated discussion around a cluster of stone weights. Except these aren't the standard shapes. One looks like a flattened dome, another is more like a thin disc. They're comparing them, arguing, switching the positions. One man slams his fist on a crate. Turns out they're dealing with external traders, foreigners from what is now Iran or maybe the Bactrian region. The problem? Everyone brought their own weights. One man uses oblong lead weights, another insists on bone tokens. You get the sense that things are not going smoothly. Eventually, a compromise emerges. They'll use the local harapan cubes but with added beads to even out the difference. A fascinating workaround, really. And it drives home the idea that standardization wasn't just convenience, it was leverage. Whoever controlled the standard had the upper hand. Literally. You walk on into a small residential cluster where artisans are starting their day. A young woman greets you at the door of a bead polishing hut and invites you in. She's working with a hand drill, spinning a thin copper rod into a semi-translucent bead. Dust fills the air, and her fingers are dark with grit. She offers you a rough lump of carnelian and nods toward a row of tiny weights on a shelf. Must match, she says. Heavy bead, no trade. You hold the rough stone in one hand and the finished bead in the other. They weigh nearly the same. But the second? Its beauty you could barter a goat for. The refinement matters. Each bead must meet the standard, not just in look, but in feel. Some scholars believe these weights were calibrated using balance scales of incredible sensitivity, maybe even hair-strung devices that could detect differences of less than a gram. And remember, this is 2500 BCE. No digital readouts. No batteries. Just physics, patience, and a whole lot of string. As you leave, the beadworker hands you something small and odd, a cube, yes, but inscribed with a tiny dot pattern on its side. Old, she whispers. My grandfather's. It's lighter than standard, oddly marked, and feels worn at the corners. Could it have been ceremonial? A teaching tool? Or counterfeit? Historians still argue whether such anomalous weights were rogue tools or test pieces from local guilds. Down the street, you stop by a public building. It's larger than most homes and has a row of benches along the outer wall. A man in a dyed tunic walks in and places a series of weights along a low stone table. One by one, others join him, each laying down a weight of their own. There are murmurs, exchanges, nods. No coins. No documents. Just weights. You finally gather this is a merchant guild meeting. They're agreeing to new seasonal terms, possibly adjusting for drought-shortened harvests. The weights aren't just tools, they're votes. Each merchant's contribution represents buying power, influence. It's as if you brought your calculator to a shareholders' meeting and no one questioned it. A boy rushes in, dusty and breathless, with a broken weight. He places the two halves on the table. The group pauses. A few men examine the break, clean but suspicious. They whisper. Someone pulls out another cube and weighs it. One man frowns. Then, quite deliberately, he snaps his own cube in two. It cracks. Hollow. A scam. The room erupts, not in violence, but in disappointment. The scammer is pointed at. He stands, red-faced, and leaves without a word. No one stops him. Maybe he's learned. Maybe he'll be back. But he's out for now. Balance is sacred. The boy who delivered the broken weight gets a pat on the head and a string of dried dates. You watch, amazed. Here, even a child understands the code of stone. As evening slides in once more, you find yourself seated outside a candlelit stall where an older man carves weights by lamplight. His tools are worn. His motions slow and deliberate. He's calibrating a 16-gram cube, scraping tiny flakes until it balances with one already on the scale. No numbers, no ruler. Just feel. You ask him how he knows it's right. He smiles. I dream the weight, he says. Then I make it real. You can't argue with that. By now, you've learned to recognize them. The weights, that is. They're like breadcrumbs scattered through every part of the society. Not just tucked into merchant stalls or hidden in storage jars, but embedded in daily life like trusted companions. And tonight, as the air grows cooler and the streets of Mohenjo-Daro settle into their moonlit hush, you find yourself invited somewhere unexpected. The house of a sealmaker. He's a compact, quiet man with nimble fingers and an obsession with precision. His home, though modest, feels more like a laboratory than a residence. Clay tablets line the walls. Stamps, some with animals, others with indecipherable script, sit neatly in rows. And on his central work table, weights, lots of them. Not just cubes now, but domes, cones, even teardrop shapes that glint oddly in the candlelight. Seals lie, he murmurs, running a hand over a polished block. But weights don't, he explains in clipped phrases. Each seal he carves serves a different purpose. Certifying a trade, marking ownership, signaling alliance. But when someone tries to forge a seal or fake a trade, it's the weights that tell the truth. If the grain weighs wrong, the seal is smoke. You test this with a simple scale. He hands you a small sack of lentils and a cube labeled with a faint dot. You place them on opposite pans of the balance and it tips predictably. Then he swaps out your weight for a slightly shinier one, just a hair smaller. This time it balances. You raise your eyebrows. Fake weight, he confirms. Polished to pass. And now you understand. Fraud in the Indus wasn't just forgery of seals. It was subtler, smaller, a trick of millimeters. Historians still debate how widespread such practices were, Were fake weights criminal tools or clever coping mechanisms when times got tight? Just then, a young woman enters the workshop carrying a sealed pot. She's from a nearby warehouse, and she looks annoyed. "Mark's wrong," she tells the sealmaker, setting the jar down with a heavy thud. They underweight it again. You follow her to the warehouse, where long rows of clay jars, each sealed with symbols and stamped impressions, stand like quiet sentinels. The jars hold lentils, grains, and other dry goods. The clerks here don't count individual items. They weigh entire jars. One clerk lets you peer into his logbook, not paper, but a clay tablet scratched with rows of symbols and notations. You notice the same sets of dots repeated, 3 dots, 5 dots, 7. The weights again. A language of their own. You linger by a clerk who's weighing a new batch of sesame. He uses a set of polished stones neatly organized in a carved tray. His scale is made of wood and bronze, delicately balanced, almost artistic. As he works, he hums a song, a light melody about keeping things fair. You ask what it means. "Grandfather's song," he says with a smile. "For every grain you steal, a bird loses a feather." You chuckle. Probably not a direct economic model, but poetic all the same. There's something unexpectedly philosophical about the place. A balance isn't just a tool, it's a symbol of justice, of cosmic order. Some scholars even suggest the Harappans may have viewed balance as sacred, much like the Egyptians with their feather of Ma'at. But in the Indus? No judgment day needed, just your scale and your integrity. Outside, you spot a row of children playing a game. They're stacking clay tokens on a flatboard, giggling when their piles topple. One child, older than the rest, is clearly winning. He's methodical, focused. You watch as he stacks 3 standard weights and then adds a smaller one, adjusting for just the right balance before slapping his hands together in victory. You ask the girl beside you what the game is. "Weight war," she says with a grin. "Like traders. No breaking rules or your turn ends." You realize these children are practicing commerce before they can even write. A full-blown economy of mini-entrepreneurs. You wander farther, finding a more somber space, a place of worship or what seems to be. There's no towering idol or obvious altar, just a sunken pool and a line of carved niches along the wall. In one of them, curiously, sits a single weight. You tilt your head. Why here? A local elder offers an answer, though his voice is soft, almost hesitant. "Balance for the soul," he says. "We weigh the heart, not just the barley." It's unclear if this is literal or metaphorical. Was this a funerary custom? A symbolic ritual? Historians still argue whether weights had religious functions or if modern romanticism just wants them to. Either way, the image sticks in your mind. A tiny cube is witness to both trade and transcendence. As dusk falls, a final scene awaits you, a caravan preparing to leave the city. Traders and animals jostle in the torchlight, loading goods wrapped in linen and knotted rope. You're drawn to a man tying a pouch of weights to his belt. "Always carry your own," he says, as if it's the first rule of survival. "Trust no one's cubes but yours." He pats a camel, adjusts the pouch, and steps into the dark. You watch him go, shadows swallowing him whole. He doesn't look back. And somehow you understand, in this world, your weight is your word. You wake up to a warm breeze drifting through the open window of a brick guesthouse. Somewhere, a rooster announces the sunrise with more enthusiasm than talent. Your host, an elderly woman with startlingly white hair and the quick wit of someone who's negotiated too many market deals, is already up, sweeping the floor with a bundle of reeds. "Did you sleep like a stone weight?" She chuckles, handing you a flat disc of barley bread. You grin at the pun. Around here, even metaphors are calibrated. The market is waking too, and this morning you're going deeper. Past the fruit sellers and bead vendors, down a quieter alley, to a compound that locals call the registry. No sign on the door, no bright displays. Just an open space shaded by a slatted roof and a ring of scribes tapping styluses against wet clay. The scribes are mostly young, mostly male, all intensely focused. They work in pairs. One reads out the information, numbers, names, maybe destinations, and the other presses it into the tablet. There's no alphabet here, not yet. Just pictographs, abstract marks, and the occasional animal. And beside each tablet? Weights. Always weights. Each record has its cube, a passing supervisor murmurs, barely slowing his pace. You follow him to a storage shelf where finished tablets dry in neat rows. He taps one with his knuckle. This one logs 2 bundles of cloth traded for 8 shekels of copper. Here's the trader's seal, and this he points to a trio of dot clusters matches the weight set. No weight, no record. You realize what he means. The Harapans didn't just trust writing. They double-checked it, etched it in stone, and proved it in balance. Weights were their backup plan, their analog audit trail. Historians still argue whether these registry tablets were for public display or private archives, but either way, they're evidence of a system that deeply valued verification. You're handed a clay token. It's small, marked with 3 clean dots and a curve that looks like a fish. Test it, the clerk says, gesturing toward a weight bench. You do. The weight matches the one marked standard 3. Not a fraction off. It's impressive. Actually, it's intimidating. These people weren't just organized, they were relentless. Obsessive. You ask the clerk what happens when a weight goes missing or is found to be off. We melt it. He says it casually, but you hear the gravity. There is no tolerance for inaccuracy here. The society doesn't bend to error, it scorches it out. Later that afternoon, you find yourself in a different kind of registry, the docks. Boats line the river, their sails slacken the heat, while porters load jars, crates, and bales. One merchant calls out prices. Another weighs a crate of turmeric using, yes, stone weights suspended from a bronze hook. But it's not just goods that are moving. It's people. You meet a man from La Halle, another Harapan city on the coast. His accent lilts differently. He carries a pouch of his own weights, rounded, polished, tagged with tiny bits of shell to denote size. Every city has its quirks, he says. But our scales agree. This, you learn, is crucial. The weight system wasn't just a Mohenjo-daro invention. It spread carefully, precisely across the entire Indus Valley network. And while different regions had their own flair, the standard weight increments remained stunningly consistent. Historians marvel at this. How did a civilization without kings or conquest maintain such unity? Maybe the weights were their glue. A decentralized, non-imperial standard that let everyone speak the same economic language, even if their scripts and pottery styles differed. An agreement, not an order. Of course, not everyone was happy with the rules. Near the edge of the docks, you spot a small confrontation. A trader from the mountains argues with a city clerk about a shipment of lapis lazuli. The issue? The clerk's weight set reads under, making the trader's goods seem light. The clerk demands a recount. The trader, fuming, offers to bring his own weights. You can almost hear the gears in your head clicking. This is the problem of every economic system, trust versus verification. In this case, the dispute is settled with a double check overseen by a neutral porter. His weights? Sealed. Approved. See, he says, balancing the scales perfectly. No bias. Just stone. You walk away wondering, was this piece by calibration? Instead of weapons, they carried cubes. Instead of threats, they argued over grams. Later, you join a group of apprentices sitting in a shaded corner, listening to an elder explain how to test weights for balance. He drops a tiny cube into water to show density. Another he weighs 3 times on differently made scales to check consistency. He pauses, picks up a slightly misshapen stone, and holds it high. This one, he says, was cursed by a lazy artisan. Always a little off. The kids gasp. You suspect he's exaggerating, but you enjoy the drama. Some say off-weight stones bring bad deals, he continues. Or angry gods. But mostly, they just annoy everyone. It's a joke, but one laced with truth. Accuracy here isn't optional. It's sacred. That evening, you return to your guest house. Your host has made lentil stew, which you eat with flatbread torn into strips. She offers you a sweet date balls rolled in crushed sesame and pours a dark beer into a shallow bowl. You've seen the weights, she says, tipping her drink toward yours. Now tell me, what did they weigh down? You blink. Trade? She laughs. No. The chaos. And just like that, it clicks. The weights weren't just about buying or selling. They were control. Certainty. A promise in stone that things won't fall apart. Outside, the city hums quietly. Somewhere, a clerk presses symbols into clay. A boat shifts in its berth. A child counts dots on a game piece. And beneath it all? Balance. You stir early the next morning, not from noise, but from a silence so complete it makes your ears ring. It's the calm before a storm, not of rain, but of barter. The markets will open soon, and today you've been invited to follow a traveling merchant. His name is Reuven. His beard is trimmed, his robes are sun-bleached, and his donkey is far more opinionated than he is. They've just arrived from Dalavira, a city near the edge of the desert, and their cart is stacked with shell bangles, woolen cords, and of course, his personal collection of calibrated weights. Never trade with another man's stones, Reuven says, with the knowing smile of someone who's lost a deal or two that way. Unless they match yours exactly. His weights are stored in a small leather pouch, each cube wrapped in linen. He unwraps them slowly like sacred items. They're smoother than the ones you've seen in Mohenjo-daro, rounded at the corners and slightly darker in color. When you ask why, he raises an eyebrow. Desert stones, he says. Harder. Hold their mass better. You trail behind him as he navigates the side streets, stopping at makeshift stalls and shaded corners where informal trade is happening. A woman selling dried fish eyes his bangles. She picks one up, weighs it in her hand, then gestures toward a tightly bound packet of saffron. Negotiation begins, not with shouting or hand-waving, but with an unspoken ritual. Out come the weights. Hers are chipped, well-worn. His gleams slightly. They each set their cubes on a small wooden plank. Then, slowly, they line them up side by side. One set is a little off, by barely a grain of rice, and so begins a quiet but tense back and forth. Adjusting weights, adding grains of sand, testing again. You'd think they were preparing for surgery, not fish and bangles. In the end, a compromise is reached. Reuven accepts the saffron. She takes 2 bangles and a length of wool cord. They both smile. Deal done. No contracts, no taxes, he tells you later, nudging his donkey forward. Just trust, and a few honest stones. It's a beautiful system if everyone plays fair. But you're starting to wonder what happens when they don't. That afternoon, under the hot sun, you stumble into the outskirts of a trade festival. Temporary stalls have sprung up like mushrooms, and people from every part of the Indus network have gathered to hawk their wares. Beads from Lahal, carnelian from Gujarat, copper tools, dyed textiles, salt, perfume, dried herbs. The air smells like a spice rack was tossed into a bonfire. And at every other table? Weights. Hanging, resting, being compared and argued over. A young boy pulls a prank by slipping a pebble into someone's pouch of standards. He gets a firm whack on the head and a lecture that probably starts with, "Do you want to be exiled?" You pass by a booth where a pair of twins are selling dyed cloth. Their table is covered in weights, but unlike others, theirs are made of polished jasper. Custom-made, one of them says proudly. We use brass scales and carry certificates. Certificates? She pulls out a strip of copper with etched symbols. A seal from the Artisans Guild in Harappa. They test every weight, she explains. No variance allowed. You realize what's happening, accreditation. Even without an empire, the Indus cities had developed a kind of guild system. Standardized weights issued by local authorities, verified and sometimes sealed. Some merchants had begun treating weights not just as tools, but as status symbols like fancy watches for the prehistoric elite. But not everyone is impressed. Down a side path, you find a grizzled old trader with a table of rough, irregular stones. Don't need no seals, he growls, sipping something strong-smelling. Been using these since before half these kids were born. You watch him make a trade using what looks like a lopsided brick. His buyer doesn't argue, it's someone he's clearly dealt with for years. Trust, it seems, can still trump standardization, though only just. Nearby, you hear an argument. 2 young traders shouting over a weight set that's off by half a unit. An elder steps in, measures both sets, and declares them both wrong. It gets awkward quickly. You think back to that cursed off-weight from yesterday. Maybe it wasn't cursed, maybe it was just bad math. Or maybe, just maybe, some of these folks knew exactly what they were doing. Historians still debate whether fraud in Indus trade was common or rare, but the mere existence of so many checks and balances suggests people were definitely tempted. Reuven finds you again just before sunset. His donkey is grumbling and he's sold most of his bangles. Want to see something odd? He asks, motioning you toward a covered tent. Inside, a woman is offering an unusual service. Weight divination. Yes, that's right, fortune-telling through stones. You sit, half laughing, as she pulls out a velvet cloth, lays down 5 stone cubes and rolls them like dice. They speak of balance, she whispers. But yours is tilted. You crave control. Perhaps too much. You're about to laugh, but she leans in. Watch your weights, she says. One may betray you. You step back out into the dimming market. Torches flicker. Someone plays a reed flute. The weight diviner's voice echoes in your head, probably nonsense. Still, as you watch traders pack up their scales, you think about how this whole system rests on a delicate balance of trust, precision, and human hands. What happens when the balance tips? That night, back in your guest house, you wrap your thoughts in the soft rustle of reed mats and the hum of night insects. You close your eyes with one final image, a quiet trade, a handshake sealed with stone. You wake to the rattle of cartwheels over cobblestone and the hum of early chatter outside your window. Today, you're heading upstream, literally. Your host has arranged for you to ride along on a river transport boat moving north along the Gagarhakra, that long-forgotten, possibly mythical, probably real river that may or may not have once pulsed like a vein through the heart of the Indus civilization. Historians still debate whether the Gagar was a mighty river in its heyday or just a seasonal stream beefed up by enthusiastic archaeology. But you're not here to argue geohydrology. You're here for the cargo. Because boats, just like marketplaces, carried weights. You hop on board just after sunrise. The deck smells like wet rope and fermented grain. The captain, a wiry man with calloused hands, gives you a nod and offers you something in a leaf-wrapped bundle. It's not breakfast, it's ballast. Small stone cubes. Helps us weigh down the front, he explains. Also helps us measure trades midstream. You blink. Floating scales. The boat pushes off, and the river catches its rhythm. As you glide between mudbanks and waving reeds, you watch the crew work. Every sack, pot, or bundle loaded has to be accounted for. Not with paper, not with tablets, just with stones. The captain carries a set of weights tied together with fiber rope, each piece marked with a tiny carved groove. He drops one in your hand. It's denser than it looks. These, he says, keep the boat honest. The river trade isn't just about moving goods. It's about documenting value with every splash of the oar. You pass another vessel heading south. The boats drift closer for a quick float-by barter. A jug of oil for 2 sacks of barley. And in the center of both decks, portable balance scales, swinging in the breeze like sleepy metronomes. The transaction is quick, quiet, and strangely elegant, like 2 dancers passing in opposite directions. There's something sacred about it. And yes, a little chaotic. Midway through the journey, your boat docks briefly at a river port, little more than a cluster of warehouses and claybrick platforms. Here, officials in simple linen tunics oversee the weighing and recording of traded goods. But their ledgers are unusual. No tablets. No writing even. Instead, they press seals into wet clay and pile up standard weights beside each imprint. It's a visual language. Each seal, each cube, each arrangement tells a story: who traded what, when, and for how much. You watch a young boy arrange weights in a perfect triangle, 4 stones forming the base, then 3, 2, 1, before stamping the top clay with a stylized bull seal. Receipt, he explains. Like a pyramid of proof. You feel your modern brain ache a little. No paper, no coinage, no ink, just clay, stone, and memory. Yet it works. A fisherman nearby shows you his personal set of weights, tiny, smooth, black stones tucked into a gourd. He uses them not for trade, but to track daily catch. 1 stone equals 10 fish. Lose a stone and he says, the river stole my profit. His laugh is weathered, his hands rough, but his system? Impeccable. As the boat continues northward, the scenery shifts. The river narrows slightly, curving through hillier terrain. Monkeys chatter in the trees and the air smells of tamarind and moss. You pass another port, this one more elaborate. It even has a dockside shrine. The crew drops an offering, a pinch of grain and 1 stone cube placed reverently beside the altar. Safe travels, someone whispers. Even trade, it seems, needs a little divine insurance. Later, you ask the captain why they still bother with weights when trade is often based on bulk or trust. He grins and taps his temple. Memory fades. Stone doesn't. There's something poetic about that. Each of these cubes, small, simple, dense, outlasts the people who handled them. They're not just economic tools. They're artifacts in progress, moving from palm to palm, city to city, becoming part of the archaeology of commerce. And some of them are downright weird. At your final stop, you meet a collector, a slightly eccentric one. He lives in a hilltop house overlooking the river bend and claims to own the strangest weight in the valley. You're skeptical, until he shows you. It's round. A perfect sphere of polished granite, the size of a grapefruit. No markings, no grooves, just smooth. You expect it to be a tool or maybe a weapon. But he insists, it's a weight, one used in sacred rituals. He claims it was used in ceremonial balancing, rituals where the value of offerings had to match a divine stone, like a spiritual audit. Historians still argue whether these were symbolic or practical. He says, cradling the orb like it might whisper secrets. But me, I say both. Everything sacred begins as something useful. You leave that hilltop home with your brain full of river wind, boat rhythms, and the sound of stone tapping against wood. The trip has taught you something quiet but profound. Mobility didn't mean chaos for the industry. It meant patterns, repetition, weights that didn't just measure value, they carried it. As night falls, you lie back under the stars beside the riverbank, listening to the soft lapping of water against clay. Somewhere downstream, another boat shifts. Another stone is placed. Another exchange begins. The current always moves, but the weights, they stay true. The next morning, the sun creeps over the hills, golden and shy. You're sore from sleeping on a reed mat and vaguely regret eating that slightly fermented date last night. But curiosity pulls you to your feet before your stomach has time to complain. Today, you're heading inland, away from the meandering riverbanks and into one of the lesser-known satellite settlements of the Indus Valley. A kind of way station between major urban hubs. It's not a city, not quite a village either. More like a rest stop with an identity crisis. As you wander dusty paths framed by half-crumbling mud walls, you start to notice a patterned small, square alcoves built into household facades. They look like miniature mailboxes, each one holding a single, smooth stone cube. No locks, no guards, just sitting there in plain view. A passerby chuckles at your puzzled look. "It's the neighbor's trust shelf," he says. "Come again?" Apparently, in this town, small weights were used in a kind of barter IOU. If someone borrowed a tool or sack of grain, they left a weight in the niche until they could return the favor. It wasn't currency exactly, it was collateral. A symbol of value, but also of social accountability. Historians still argue whether this system was widespread or just a local quirk. But you have to admit it's oddly elegant. And trust-heavy. You can't help but imagine trying this back home. You lend someone your bike and they leave a rock on your porch? Might not fly in suburbia. You peek into one alcove and find a tiny soapstone piece shaped like a cat. It's not a real unit, just a charm. A child's edition, maybe? Someone thought their promise needed a little personality. Later, you're invited into a family home, low ceiling, smooth plaster walls, bundles of grain tucked neatly into corners. Over a breakfast of chickpea cakes and a tangy pickle that might just wake the dead, your host pulls out a flat, rectangular box carved from wood. Inside is a set of graduated weights, each more polished than the last. They're wrapped in strips of old cloth, lovingly stored like heirlooms. "These," she says with pride, "belong to my grandfather's grandfather." You expect a long family story. What you get instead is a kind of stone symphony. She begins tapping them gently on a wooden bowl, producing a series of musical notes. You blink. Turns out some people believed certain weights sang true when struck, vibrating at a tone that proved their authenticity. Whether that's real science or just good marketing, well, historians still argue about that too. But the sound is oddly soothing. Later, you're shown another kind of weight, a set made entirely from terracotta. They're larger, cruder, baked in an open kiln, and apparently only used for bulk goods like hay or wool. These weren't precision tools. They were workhorses. Your guide, an excitable young boy with more freckles than fear, demonstrates by dropping one into a basket of millet. "1 stone, this much millet," he says. Then adds 2 stones, double millet. Unless the millet is wet, then it's a mess. His math is shaky, but his enthusiasm is rock solid. By midday, you're wandering through a communal workshop where locals still replicate ancient tools for tourists and festivals. You watch as a craftsman carves a cube from black basalt, measuring it with a string and a piece of bone, his only tools. There's no digital scale, no laser precision. Just generations of muscle memory and an eye that doesn't blink. You ask how he knows when a weight is truly accurate. He shrugs. When it feels right. Not exactly peer-reviewed, but he shows you something interesting, a comparison test using water displacement. He drops 2 cubes into identical clay cups, marking the water rise with a charcoal line. The results? Surprisingly even. You don't need fancy, he says. You need consistent. The workshop's centerpiece is a mural on the wall, painted in gentle ochres and burnt sienna. It shows a figure half myth, half merchant, balancing 2 giant bowls, one filled with gold, the other with grain. The text beneath is long faded, but your host translates the local version. "We measure not the object, but the fairness of the hand." A little on the poetic side, but you get it. Weights here weren't just technical tools, they were philosophical ones. They demanded honesty. Or at least the appearance of it. Your final stop before sundown is a small public plaza where elderly men gather to trade stories, herbs, and, yes, stones. One man is showing off a lucky weight carved in the shape of a tortoise and stained a deep purple from some mineral nobody's quite identified. Brings profit, he whispers, and wards off tax collectors. Superstition? Obviously. Effective? Who knows? You sit on a cracked bench, watching the day fade and the shadows stretch long across the stone-lined streets. There's a weight in your pocket now, a small one, smooth and cool, given to you by the craftsman earlier. For memory, he said. Not for measuring. And that's the thing, isn't it? These weights, they carry more than mass. They carry stories, jokes, luck, obligation. Sometimes debt. Sometimes hope. You close your eyes as the breeze picks up, dry and warm and laced with distant spices. You feel the cube shift in your pocket, its tiny, silent insistence that value isn't always counted in coins or numbers. Sometimes it's just a well-made stone and the trust it earns. You wake early to the sound of splashing. Soft, rhythmic, persistent. Outside your window, a row of women is already at work scrubbing laundry on a stone slab beside a narrow canal. You yawn, stretch, and pad barefoot toward the water, the cool clay floor sticking slightly to your feet. The cube from yesterday still rests in your satchel, as if refusing to be forgotten. Today, you're headed downriver by boat. A narrow, banana leaf-covered skiff steered by a man with no teeth and an impeccable sense of humor. His jokes are mostly about crocodiles with digestive issues. You nod politely and make a mental note to keep your limbs inside the boat. You're bound for a storage port, a kind of riverside distribution center. The Indus civilization, it turns out, didn't just build cities and homes. They built networks, trade hubs, cargo posts, granaries, essential arteries for a society that, despite its age, knew how to keep things moving. As you arrive, the scale of the place surprises you. Not massive like a city, but clearly planned. Low warehouses line the bank, their mudbrick walls scored with tally marks and symbols. Men unload baskets from reed boats while scribes squat nearby, recording every movement with sharp tools and sharper eyes. You're introduced to a man named Veril who oversees the stone weights at this depot. He's lean, wiry, and moves with the energy of someone who sleeps in 90-minute shifts. He holds up a small black cube between thumb and forefinger. This one is exactly 16 times the seed weight, he says, like that's supposed to mean something. Seed weight? Turns out many Indus weights were based on a binary system. The smallest common unit was likely based on a single seed, maybe from a local tree or pulse crop. Historians still debate what seed exactly, though chickpea and radi get tossed around a lot. And from that tiny organic grain, an entire geometric hierarchy emerged: 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, like a math teacher's dream wedding cake. You help him organize the inventory, lifting and stacking stones that all look deceptively similar. They're in a dozen materials: steatite, chert, jasper, and range in color from ash gray to coffee black. Some are etched with symbols you can't read. Others have faded completely, their surfaces worn smooth by years of handling and humid air. Veril shows you the testing bench, a flat slab with a delicate balance scale suspended above it. Every weight in the inventory must be checked weekly. Not for superstition or ceremony, but because this place deals in fairness. If a single stone is off, even by a grain, it could throw off entire shipments of wheat, beads, or tin. You observe a test. A porter delivers a basket of semi-precious stones from upstream, and Veril sets to work, carefully balancing a 64-unit weight against the load. The scale tips. He adds a 4. It swings back. Adds a 1. It levels. Then pauses, squinting. The humidity is messing with it, he mutters. You can't help but smile. Even 4,000 years ago, people blamed the weather. During a break, Veril pulls out a cracked piece of pottery. On its inner surface are concentric circles and hand-scored divisions like a clock met a dartboard. Not just for looks, he says. We think this helped track measurements by volume and weight. He spins it lightly. The whole thing wobbles like a lazy frisbee. Still works, he grins. Just don't drop it. As the sun reaches its peak, you wander to a shaded corner of the compound where older traders lounge with mugs of barley beer. They tell stories of the golden weights, legendary cubes made of precious metals and used only for temple offerings or royal audits. Never seen one, of course, one man mutters. But I heard the high priest kept his in a silk pouch inside a mango pit. Another pipes in. I heard they used to float. You raise an eyebrow. Yeah, that's why they vanished. Divine weights shouldn't sink. Even Verrill laughs at that one. Historians, as you might guess, still argue whether such floating weights were metaphorical or actual innovations. Perhaps they were hollow? Or simply imaginary, built to inflate temple prestige? Before sunset, a small drama unfolds. A delivery is off. The weights don't add up. Suspicion brews. Fingers point. Voices rise. Verrill tests and retests and finally identifies the problem. A single stone, worn down at one corner, has lost just enough material to throw off the balance. He sets it aside. Retired, he says solemnly. Then, turning to you, he presses the cube into your hand. For you. A weight with a story. It's rough, flawed, a little chipped, but you accept it like an Olympic medal. Not all objects lose their worth with time. Some just shift their purpose. Later, as you ride back upriver, moonlight painting silver lines across the black water, you reach into your bag and pull out the old cube. You balance it on your palm, just to feel its shape. It doesn't sing. It doesn't sparkle. It's not precise anymore, but it's been held by hands that once traded spices and lapis and resin. It's been part of systems bigger than itself. It mattered. And now, weirdly, so does your holding it. You close your eyes and lean back, the night folding in around you like a velvet curtain. And in your pocket, a tiny, imperfect cube reminds you. Even in ancient times, everything had weight. Physical, symbolic, emotional. You didn't need coins or contracts. Just trust, stone, and memory. The next morning, the cube is still in your hand. You must have fallen asleep gripping it like a good luck charm. A stone weight instead of a teddy bear, how very mature. You stretch, blink against the pale dawn, and realize something. You've barely scratched the surface of this civilization. Today, you're heading to a curious ruin on the outskirts of the ancient city of Lahal. Unlike the grid streets and elevated citadel platforms you've seen before, this site feels different. Not grander exactly, just more specialized. It's where the gears of commerce met water. Lahal was one of the Indus Valley's most active port cities. And right in the middle of it all, a giant, brick-lined basin. A dry dock if you believe the majority of archaeologists. A public swimming pool if you ask the fringe theorists. And a drinking trough for alien elephants if you read too many conspiracy blogs. You tread along the edge of this rectangular void. It's massive. 40 feet wide, over 7 feet deep, with steps leading down into its center. The walls are lined with finely fitted kiln-burnt bricks, tight, nearly seamless, laid with such care that not even sand has crept into the joints after thousands of years. It's hauntingly quiet here, like the water forgot to return. According to mainstream scholars, this dock once connected to a canal, allowing goods from distant places, Arabia, Mesopotamia, perhaps even Africa, to be floated inland. Cargo would arrive by boat, be weighed on those iconic cube stones, then distributed across the city's warehouses. The system would have required not just engineering genius, but extreme standardization. You walk past a large platform where merchants might have stood with ledgers, well, proto-ledgers. Likely bark scrolls or palm leaves or maybe just grooves scratched into clay. Either way, the entire system depended on trust in the measure. A bead of lapis from Afghanistan had to weigh the same in Lahal as it did in Harappa. The cube in your satchel suddenly feels like a passport. Just beyond the dockyard, you come across a small, roofless structure, a weights workshop. At least, that's what the signs suggest. Chunks of uncut chert lie scattered beside broken molds. One lump bears the faint trace of a cube corner, like someone had just begun carving before stepping away for a snack and never returning. Here, you meet a local guide named Mira. She's young, curious, and possibly the most excited person you've met in a week. Her specialty? Reconstructing ancient tools using period methods. She shows you how they may have shaped weights by grinding raw stone against coarse surfaces, checking for balance using primitive scales. We think some craftsmen used river pebbles as the original reference weights, she says, holding up a smooth, naturally rounded stone. They'd test and retest until it matched the official seed measure. You ask how they verified if something was exactly correct. Well, she shrugs, they probably had a master set locked away somewhere. A standard so sacred only scribes and merchants could access it. Kind of like today's kilogram prototype in Paris, but, dustier. The idea strikes you, a whole civilization trusting their economy to a rock that matched another rock hidden in someone's drawer. Fragile. Elegant. Totally human. You help Mira recreate a 16-unit cube using only tools she's carved herself, stone blades, bone files, and a lot of patience. It's meditative work punctuated by Myra's terrible jokes. Why did the Indus merchant get dumped? You pause. Why? He was too weighty for her taste. You groan. That one's criminal. Arrest me with a chert bracelet. At lunch, she offers you spiced lentils and millet flatbread, served on a terracotta plate. It's simple, nourishing, and probably not far off from what artisans here might have eaten. Between bites, Mira brings up a fascinating point. Some scholars believe these weights were part of a guild system, like specific craftsmen had the right to produce official cubes. Maybe they even stamped them. See this tiny mark? She points to a minuscule scratch you hadn't noticed. It resembles a fishhook, or a half-moon. Historians still debate whether such symbols indicated workshops, weight values, or divine approvals. Later that day, you watch a reenactment. Two merchants trade goods using replica weights. One man pours out a heap of ivory bangles. The other counters with a bag of dried ginger and carnelian beads. They weigh, adjust, weigh again. No shouting. No calculators. Just stone, scale, and quiet understanding. There's something calming about it all. The physicality. The balance. The ritual. Every trade, a handshake in geometry. As the sun dips low, Mira hands you a final gift. A tiny cotton pouch. Inside, your own chert weight, carved today. Only 3 units, she says. But it's yours. Now you can start your own civilization. You laugh but take it seriously. Because that's how the Indus did it, isn't it? One person, one stone, one measure of trust at a time. That night, back in your quarters near the canal, you lay the weight beside your borrowed cube and compare them. One old, one new. Both deliberate. Both saying, I am what I say I am. You drift off wondering what your own life would look like, measured in stones. How many units would kindness be? Or patience? Or memory? Whatever the answer, you fall asleep knowing this. You've seen a world where trade worked without kings, without gold, without threats. Just weights. Just balance. You wake to soft bells clinking from a nearby herder's flock, the kind of gentle metallic percussion that would make a perfect ringtone, if you weren't determined to unplug from modernity just a bit longer. You sit up slowly, still thinking about those perfect cubes and the idea that fairness once came down to a stone on a scale. Today, your steps turn inland, toward a site that hasn't been fully excavated, which makes it even more deliciously mysterious. The locals call it Khatdiji, but the ancient name, if there ever was one, is lost to time. What remains are mounds of eroded mud brick and evidence of a once flourishing settlement perched atop an artificial hill. You scramble up the slope carefully. No handrails, no signs, no curated experience. Just you, the wind, and the ghosts of city planners from 4,500 years ago. You pause at the summit to catch your breath and take in the view. To the north, the plains stretch toward the Indus River. To the south, the dry crags of early desert encroach like a rising tide. Here's where it gets weird. Underneath the visible city lies an older one. In archaeological terms, it's called a pre-Harappan layer, meaning this place was already humming along before the bigger, better-known Indus cities came into their own. The site suggests continuity, not sudden revolution. Civilizations don't always boom out of nowhere. Sometimes they simmer slowly over centuries. Like a pot of lentils no one's quite sure is done yet. You wander down into the lower strata where the remains of earlier homes and workshops peek through the dust. A few rooms have evidence of standardized measurements, stone platforms with etched grooves and depressions that might have been molds. One looks suspiciously like it could have held a 1-unit cube. You run your fingers along the indentation. It fits. Archaeologists think the people of Khatdiji were the innovators, the trial-and-error folks who set the groundwork for the later stone weights. Maybe their units were a bit inconsistent, close, but not quite there. Think of them as the beta testers of balance. You picture it, a young artisan chipping away at a piece of raw chert, weighing it against a pebble and sighing. Too heavy. Try again. 1,000 attempts before a standard emerges. It's comforting, isn't it? Even perfection had to be prototyped. Back on the surface, you pass a dry cistern, its clay walls cracked like ancient skin. Nearby, a rust-colored figurine sits half-buried, a bull with an exaggerated hump, possibly a fertility symbol or maybe just the earliest version of a company mascot. Scholars still argue whether these little animals were used in rituals, games, or classroom lessons. Or all three. Kids gotta learn economics somehow. As you make your way toward a partially excavated building, you notice more artifacts, shell bangles, broken beads, terracotta cones. But no gold. No royal bling. That's the Indus trademark, elegance without egos. No giant statues of kings, no pyramids carved with their names, no declarations of "I am your glorious overlord." Just clean city grids and a whole lot of precise rock cubes. Inside the building is something particularly fascinating, a damaged seal. It's small, square, and stamped with strange symbols, Indus script, still undeciphered to this day. Historians haven't cracked the code yet, though many have tried. Some think it's a full language. Others argue it's a system of tokens, more like a labeling method for goods or ownership. This seal is different, though. It has a series of repeating symbols arranged beneath a carved image of a seated figure with a bird perched beside them. Some believe it could be a merchant's mark. Others? A god. Maybe even a math deity, because if you're trusting your entire trade network to measurements, it makes sense to pray to someone who cares about decimals. In a far corner of the room, half covered in sand, is something that stops you cold, a broken scale arm. Just a sliver of terracotta with a hole at one end. It could be nothing. But when you picture it suspended by string, balancing two shallow pans, it suddenly becomes everything. The people of Khat-Diji weren't just crafting weights, they were crafting trust. They were inventing the very idea that a transaction could be fair even when you weren't watching it. That if both parties used the same scale and the same cubes, there would be no cheating. In a way, that's more revolutionary than fire. Later, you sit beneath a withered acacia tree at the site's edge, munching on a sweet date Mira slipped into your pack. You pull out the replica cube she made and the smaller 3-unit one from Lahal. You place them side by side on a flat stone and try to imagine being the person who first decided a unit should exist at all. Someone who said, "Let's all agree this tiny rock means something." Maybe they had to convince others. Maybe they carried it from village to village, offering to weigh fish or trade lentils for copper just to show how it worked. A traveling cube salesman peddling equity. You smile at the thought. As twilight descends, the wind picks up, carrying with it the scent of distant cook fires and damp soil. The city of Khat-Diji lies quiet again, its layers whispering beneath your feet. You rise, brushing off your knees, and pocket the replica stones. This wasn't a tourist stop. This was a message across time. That order, trade, and fairness aren't just modern ideas, they're ancient instincts. You don't need a barcode scanner or a stock ticker to build civilization. Sometimes, all it takes is a handful of shaped stones and a shared sense of balance. You wake to the sound of crows, a coarse, unfiltered version of an alarm clock, and stretch beneath a canvas tarp rigged between two thorny trees. Your back's a little sore, but the thought of today's plan shakes off the stiffness. You're heading to a tiny museum tucked inside a quiet village schoolhouse. It's not on the tourist map. No big signs. No glossy gift shop. But the artifacts it holds might just change how you think about weight. A short walk through sun-baked fields brings you to the low brick building. The air inside smells like chalk and cinnamon. Someone's been storing spice sacks nearby. You're greeted by a wiry man with a silver mustache who introduces himself as Ramesh, part-time curator, full-time history enthusiast. "Come," he says, waving you in. "I'll show you the funny ones first." That's how you end up staring at a collection of misfit weights. Stones that don't quite match any known standard, too heavy, too light, some even oddly shaped. One looks like a squashed pyramid, another like a teardrop. There's even a lopsided cube with a groove down the middle as if it was halfway into becoming two. Mistakes, you ask? Ramesh grins. Or innovation? Historians still argue whether these outliers were experimental units, regional variations, or just manufacturing errors. One theory suggests they were intentional, made to cheat scales just slightly to gain a trading edge. Think ancient insider trading, except your assets are limestone pebbles and no one's texting stock tips. What's fascinating is that even the misfits seem deliberate. No one just tossed random rocks onto the market. These were carved, smoothed, cared for. Someone gave them weight in both senses of the word. Ramesh moves you along to the star exhibit, housed in a dusty glass case held together by tape and optimism. Inside sits a tiny weight made not from stone, but from dense, dark metal. It's got a faint shimmer like old pewter. This one, Ramesh whispers, weighs exactly the same as a standard 1-unit cube. But it's metal. Metal weights are rare in the Indus Valley. Stone dominated. So this little cube has sparked heated debates. Was it ceremonial? A prototype? A one-time backup when stone was in short supply? Or maybe something even more practical, metal doesn't chip as easily. Maybe, Ramesh says, tapping the glass gently, they were trying to future-proof the system. You thank him and wander into the back room, which doubles as the village library. On one shelf, under stacks of educational posters, you find a hand-drawn chart comparing Indus weights to those found in Mesopotamia and Egypt. And right there, clear as ink, is a shared pattern. Turns out, the smallest Indus unit, about 13.6 grams, matches closely with a Sumerian weight known as a shekel. It's not an exact match, but close enough to raise eyebrows. And if you're thinking what you think you're thinking, yes, that could mean trade. There's no direct evidence of long-distance shipping invoices or dock worker complaints, customer refused shell bangles, demanded lapis, but archaeological finds link the Indus to Mesopotamia, carnelian beads in UR. Indus seals near the Persian Gulf and Mesopotamian cylinder seals carved with motifs suspiciously similar to Indus ones. So, did they synchronize their scales? Historians debate it fiercely. Some argue this overlap proves regular contact and a shared measurement standard, possibly negotiated by multilingual merchants over bowls of date stew. Others insist it's coincidence, convergent evolution, like how both dolphins and sharks ended up pointy. But here's the kicker. While other ancient civilizations often used weights marked by royal decree, complete with official symbols, the Indus valleys are almost never labeled. No king's stamp, no state-issued ID, just pure geometry. Standard by consensus, not command. That says something huge about their society. You step outside into the sun again, blinking at the shift in brightness. In your pocket, the replica cube suddenly feels heavier, as if absorbing everything you've just learned. Not just a relic, but a memory, a weight passed down through thought. At a nearby chai stall, you sit cross-legged on a woven mat, sipping sweet, milky tea while flipping through your notebook. You sketch the misfit weights and write down a theory that pops into your head. What if the diversity in weight shapes was less about error and more about role? Maybe certain industries had different standards. Maybe fish sellers used one series, bead makers another. Maybe weights were tied not just to mass, but to meaning. A bead weight wasn't just 13.6 grams. It was a good day's work, or the cost of a boat ride, or the price of a dozen dates plus a flirtatious smile. You look up at the road winding through the golden fields and think of all the people who walked it millennia ago, stone cubes bouncing in their pouches like pocket calculators. They weren't scientists. They weren't mathematicians. They were bakers, herders, potters, people who just wanted to get a fair deal. And that's the real marvel, not that the Indus Valley standardized their weights, but that they agreed to. Across cities and centuries, without a known ruler or single language, they built a system that lasted. You finish your tea and gather your bag, already planning your next stop. You're headed west tomorrow, toward a dry riverbed where rumors speak of a collapsed outpost that once traded in ivory and obsidian. But tonight, you'll stay in the village. Ramesh invites you to join his family for dinner, and over spiced lentils and warm rotis, he tells you a story. My grandfather, he says, once found a weight buried in his field. Thought it was a toy. Used it as a paperweight for 20 years before a scholar spotted it. You chuckle. The idea that something so carefully designed could be mistaken for a mere trinket feels oddly poetic. Maybe that's the fate of all great ideas. They wait quietly, disguised as something ordinary, until someone sees them clearly again. You fall asleep on a simple cot near the museum, the hum of insects outside acting as a lullaby. The cube stays tucked under your pillow like a small promise. Of fairness. Of balance. Of a time when weight was more than a number. You wake early, drawn by the clatter of hoofbeats and the shout of someone herding goats through the lane outside. The village stirs, dust kicked up by breakfast fires and the soft grind of hand mills. You stretch, pack your things, and bid farewell to Ramesh, who insists on handing you a parcel of flatbreads for the road, measured by love, not weight. He jokes, and you smile all the way to the edge of town. Today you're heading west, following the path of a long-dead river, the Gagarhakra, once thought to be the mighty Sarasvati of Vedic lore. It's dry now, a cracked ribbon of earth threading through scrubland and saltbrush. But thousands of years ago, this river may have been a thriving artery of trade, watering the heart of the Indus Valley's inland outposts. Your destination is a minor archaeological site the locals call Karadana, literally bitter grain. No one really knows why. Some say the soil there turned salty after the river dried up. Others whisper about ancient curses and spoiled harvests. The name lingers like smoke. But what's more intriguing is what's buried there. You arrive by late afternoon, sun glaring down like a spotlight. The site is humble, just a low rise in the earth dotted with excavation flags and an old tarp shelter. You're met by Asha, a wiry archaeologist with sunburned cheeks and a no-nonsense air. "You're here for the stones?" she asks. You nod. She grins and waves you over. "We've got something weird." Under a shade structure, she opens a plastic crate filled with fragments, little chips and cubes, none larger than a sugar lump. They're dark, smooth, heavy, familiar. You pick one up, roll it in your palm. It's a weight. But not just a weight, multiple, all from the same pit. "We found over 100 of them in one corner of a collapsed structure," Asha says. "Like a stockpile. What makes them strange is their uniformity. All the same size. Same density. Same perfect polish. Mass production," she says. "Or as close as we've seen. This isn't how Indus weights usually turn up. Most are scattered, found singly or in tiny clusters, often with signs of wear. But this? This looks like inventory. Fresh off the workbench." Historians still debate what this means. One camp says it's a trader's personal stash, perhaps someone who supplied weights to merchants and marketplaces. Another group argues it's more institutional. A mint, if you will. Not of coins, but of credibility. If true, this site could point to something long assumed but rarely proven: centralized production of standardized tools. Not just private exchange, but an early infrastructure of trust. You wander the dig site while Asha goes to log more notes. The earth here feels brittle, as if it resents being disturbed after so long. You find yourself standing at what was likely a small storage room, no roof, of course, just a rectangular shadow of wall bases and a patch of burned earth where something once caught fire. It's easy to imagine the room bustling centuries ago, a man or woman crouched over a workbench, polishing stone, checking balance, setting cubes on trays. Maybe humming a tune. Maybe pausing to sip sour buttermilk from a leaf cup. And then something happens. A storm? A raid? A slow abandonment as the river shifted away? Whatever it was, the weight stayed. As dusk falls, Asha lights a tiny camping stove and offers you lentils and rice, eaten with fingers and a kind of rustic elegance. You talk about why no writing has ever been conclusively deciphered from the industry. "It's maddening," she sighs. "They left us weights, beads, tools, even a drainage system. But the one thing we all want? The translation key? Gone." Still, the silence makes the weights even more poignant. These tiny stones spoke without symbols or rulers or declarations. They said, "This is fair. This is right. This is equal to that." You remember the misfit weights in Ramesh's museum and wonder if any came from places like this: half-finished products, prototypes, or even rejects. Maybe some apprentice slipped up, carving a cube slightly too large, and buried it here in shame. Or maybe, just maybe, their standards weren't rigid. Maybe they allowed for slight local variation, trusted traders to adjust for differences like a baker adjusting for flour humidity. Maybe fairness wasn't fixed, it was negotiated. It's an idea that modern systems struggle with, fluid fairness. But in the Indus world, it might have made perfect sense. Before bed, you walk a bit further from camp to where the dry riverbed begins. It's little more than a gash in the landscape now, silent and cracked, but in moonlight it still shimmers faintly. You imagine barges sliding down it centuries ago, heavy with goods and promise, with little bundles of stone cubes stashed safely near the captain's ledger. Suddenly, you remember something Asha said offhand while unpacking artifacts. "We don't find many weights in graves." That's odd, isn't it? No buried merchants clutching their trusted cubes. No grandmasters of measurement sent off with their tools of trade. In many ancient cultures, people were buried with what they valued most. So where are the weights? One theory is that they were too useful to bury, kept in circulation, passed down, like a beloved set of kitchen knives. Another is more symbolic. Maybe fairness belonged to the living. Maybe weights were tools, not trophies. You return to your cot near the dig, the night air cool and dry. There's a distant owl call and the creak of something settling in the sand. You lie there thinking about those tiny cubes. Not just artifacts, but ambassadors. Each one a quiet agreement between people. A handshake in stone. Your fingers brush the replica weight in your pocket. You press it into your palm. Try to imagine what it meant to someone 4,000 years ago. It's not just about grams or grams per cubit. It's about trust. Between buyer and seller. Neighbor and stranger. Past and future. The stars overhead glint like scattered quartz in the sky. Somewhere, buried under layers of silence and dust, more weights wait to be found. Maybe one of them holds a secret. Or maybe the secret is simply this, that a society can thrive on fairness alone. You fall asleep smiling, the night cool, the world balanced. You're waking now to the scent of wood smoke and the low hum of voices. Asha's crew is already up, bent over grid maps and soil samples, coffee cups balancing on knees and notebooks. You sit up slowly, stretch your shoulders, and savor the morning chill before the desert sun peels it away. Today's your final trek northward, back toward a better-known site, a place that may not hold many secrets left but still echoes with stories worth hearing. You've heard whispers of a rare museum exhibit coming through, something about a weight so finely calibrated that modern labs struggle to improve on its precision. So off you go, dusty boots tapping against a packed dirt trail. The morning is golden, warm, alive. Your mind flickers through everything you've seen. Bead makers and spice traders, hidden storerooms and mysterious seal marks, trickster gods carved into amulets no one can quite name. And always those tiny weights. Your route takes you through a dried-up lake basin crusted with salt and dotted with flint shards. You pass a few herders moving with their goats, their silhouettes like shadows from another century. One of them points you toward a narrow path lined with wind-bent shrubs. By late afternoon, you reach a small outpost town hugging the edge of a ruined citadel. The museum is barely more than 2 rooms, part schoolhouse, part archive, but inside, under flickering tube lights, sits a glass case that stops you cold. The weight is no bigger than your thumbnail. Jet black, perfectly square, with tiny bevels worn soft by fingers long gone. According to the tag, it dates to the mature Harappan period, circa 2500 BCE, and weighs exactly 13.63 grams. Not around. Not approximately. Exactly. Even now, thousands of years later, it's only off by a few milligrams. Modern scientists have tested it under spectrometers and atomic scales. It's made of chert, dense, durable, elegant. But what really blows their minds is the intention. The care someone took to shape this tiny thing just right, then check it, recheck it, maybe even whisper a small prayer over it. Historians still argue whether these weights were tools of science or commerce, or both. Some suggest that they formed a primitive system of metrology long before metric systems formalized. Others believe the weights doubled as status symbols. Still others say, why choose? In the Indus Valley, dual-purpose objects were everywhere, why not these? And then there's the fringe theory you almost want to believe. It says the weights weren't just economic markers, they were cosmic ones. That the smallest cubes may have mapped onto astronomical measurements, perhaps even lunar cycles. It's speculative, sure, but fun to imagine an ancient merchant gazing up at the stars and wondering if his inventory aligned with the heavens. You spend time studying the weight from every angle, watching the light bounce off its polished face. You half expect it to hum or whisper something only you can hear. Before you leave, the museum's caretaker, a slow-moving man in a wool vest, tells you a story. They found that one in the middle of a collapsed house, he says. All the walls down, but the weight, sitting perfectly upright, not even a scratch. You let that sit in your mind as you walk the streets outside. Dusty, sun-bleached, mostly empty. But every brick feels like it holds a memory. Every corner could hide a bead or a seal or, yes, another tiny stone cube. And you begin to think that maybe the true genius of the Indus Valley wasn't its grid planning or its clean drainage or even its mysterious script. Maybe it was its belief in invisible structures, systems of fairness, trust, and measure that don't need kings or armies to enforce them. Just a wait, quiet, steady, waiting. You settle down under a fig tree, pulling out your notebook. You scribble a sketch of the chert weight, then beside it a simple line. The world balances on tiny things. As twilight falls, the town exhales. Smoke curls from cook fires, and a few children chase each other between ancient stones. You close your eyes and listen, not just to the present, but to the long echo of people who once bartered in barley, laughed over lentils, and weighed truth in polished cubes. The journey has wound across dry rivers, desert outposts, bustling lanes, and sunken courtyards. But at every step, you've followed the quiet pull of those tiny stones. The small things that held great meaning, the weights that made fairness tangible, and the unspoken agreements that helped a civilization thrive. And now, before the night wraps the world in blue, it's time to rest. So now, as your body grows still and the night presses gently against your eyelids, let your breath slow just a little. Deeper. Softer. You're not walking dusty streets anymore. You're floating now, drifting gently along the dried course of the ancient Sarasvati, stars reflected in the phantom waters, moonlight polishing the memories of trade and trust and time. Let yourself remember those tiny cubes of chert and jasper. Their smooth sides, the satisfying weight in your palm, the way they balanced so perfectly even after millennia of silence. And now imagine them being set one by one on a carved wooden scale, each placement a whisper of fairness. No arguments. No loud debates. Just balance. The world narrows to that quiet moment. A trader nods. A buyer smiles. A deal is made not with bluster, but with stone. You feel it, don't you? The hush of a civilization that didn't shout its greatness but weighed it, measured it, shared it. Their story isn't carved in towering obelisks or golden thrones. It's tucked gently into the corners of storage rooms and underfloor tiles. Whispered, not shouted. So let those whispers lull you now. Let the ancient weights rock gently in your mind like a cradle. Balanced. Rested. Still. Tomorrow, the world will return. But tonight? Tonight you drift, steady and quiet, across the long-forgotten scales of time. Sleep well, traveler.